technical difficulties. YouTube is both unfriendly on the censorship side of things and technology. So we were talking about the a new bill that got introduced into the Mississippi House and state legislature that revolves sort of around hunting and regulating all that stuff, with dogs and hogs and stuff like that. Before we had some technical difficulties, Chris asked me what my thoughts on was it, and I 100% oppose this bill. I think it's unnecessary and ridiculous over regulation of something that has been a tradition and a staple of not only Mississippi but the American South for as old as time. And in the even the argument for it, the environment, uh, conservation or whatever. I think that argument is BS. I mean, we've been doing this for so long in the state. I mean, and we haven't really had any problems. So I don't see how that's a good enough argument to and to essentially impose all these fees and rules on the state of Mississippi.
Yeah, man, I agree. I mean, a lot of people are arguing that, and I mean, I haven't heard this, but I was just kind of looking into it that it's just unconstitutional.
Hmm.
Undermines a lot of due process, and just kind of taking clauses by converting, landowner rights to protect property into permit dependent privileges. But also, it's just seen as an unconstitutional regulatory taking of rights. The right to hunt, is an amendment conflict. Kind of clashes with, you know, a guarantee to hunt and fish and harvest wildlife. By the use of traditional methods, kind of like you said, it's a tradition here in Mississippi. But um, these are laws that they say are trying to promote conservation, but dog hunting, for example, has just kind of been a long-standing, like we just said, tradition in Mississippi. And the 2,000 acre threshold is pretty arbitrary. I mean, that's not conservation based, and that restricts access for the average citizen, to
Hmm.
be able to do what they want to do, without. And there's no evidence of like widespread abuse anywhere. So I think Representative Criswell called it inconsistent with constitutional decentralization, just expanding state control over private activities, which I 100% agree with. Um, Government overreach, and we already said that. This is just viewed as violating limited government principles, and just kind of creating outlaws via unenforceable rules. Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks, I think, already lacks manpower, and just imposing these taxes and fees on people without voter input is, kind of just potentially just breaching equal protection by favoring some folks with these large tracts of land. So as of this month, it's in its early stages. There's been some similar bills in the past, kind of like dog hunting bans and things like that, that have failed just because of the backlash. But I think this is something that people need to contact the representatives on. And then we'll tie this back to a biblical perspective and just how it's relevant here. I think like it raises tensions with scriptural views on stewardship, authority, and rights. So like dominion and stewardship of creation. God grants humans dominion over animals and earth for responsible use. Genesis 28, rule over every living creature. Permits and restrictions kind of hinder farmers their God-given duty to subdue and protect land, crops from damage. Treating wildlife management as state controlled rather than individual stewardship. Um, Seeing property rights as God given as opposed to government given. The Bible upholds personal property and self defense. So this is basically saying you can't defend your property against something that's damaging it. Commissioner Gibson calls these God-given property rights, which I agree with. So the bill's overreach definitely echoes some warnings that could be oppressive towards these farmers, like we said. But also there's some justice and avoiding oppression here. Scripture condemns burdenism burdensome laws that are favoring the powerful. So, like I said, this probably came from one or two people that had some issues that maybe made a nice fat campaign contribution to Mr. Keene and
Hmm.
said, "Hey, you should introduce a bill for this." Um, so anyway, it's a battle over Mississippi freedoms. Does fair chase mean fair for wildlife or unfair government intrusion on biblical stewardship? And I think that's the question that some folks got to ask. So we'll be watching that one closely. We'll see where that goes. I don't think it's going to go far, and I don't think that personally his time in office is going to go very far if he keeps introducing bills like that. But
100%.
what do I know? All right, so we'll jump next into school boards. Um, Jansen Owen, man, he's killing it right now. But he recently introduced a bill to help elect school boards. HB 1292 is like I said, introduced by Jansen Owen out of Poplarville, District 106. He's been pretty big key figure in education reform and what's going on there. He was obviously a co-author of the School Choice Bill HB2, and it seeks to make all public school board members in Mississippi elected rather than appointed. So currently, nearly half of school boards in Mississippi nearly over half, excuse me, in Mississippi are boards that are fully or partially appointed by city councils, county supervisors, or other local bodies. Um, HB 1292 would transition all boards to elected positions with 4-year terms, mandating this change by July of next year. So, what do you think about that? School boards, elected
Yeah.
or appointed?
I think they absolutely need to be elected, and for a couple of reasons. One, it makes them actually beholden to the people, and it makes sure that their actions have a lot more consequences, than they otherwise would. I know Rankin County elects some of theirs. Now Liza McKinion is the one for my district, and she's done a really good job. And I think that's part of the reason that Rankin County is an A-rated school district in the state. One of the best, if not the best, in the entire state of Mississippi. Um, and I think it would improve our school districts. I'd be curious to see the numbers on, where those school districts rank where they aren't elected. Yeah, I'd be curious to see the numbers on that, because it's just gonna make these people a lot more beholden to the people that they actually represent, and I think it's gonna create a lot more accountability.
Yeah, I mean, so Pearl, I just use that for an example because I live here. Um, they are appointed. They are not elected. You know, I've had some people that have already thrown some shade, on some not being for it. But I think elections would kind of follow a standard of partisan or nonpartisan processes that depending on the district rules, this bill stems from parents for advocacy for greater direct accountability, like you were just saying, to kind of help have a voice in those local education decisions because they're handling big budgets. They're handling the stuff that goes into these schools. They're handling the stuff that's in the libraries. They're dealing with the curriculums. They're dealing with the hiring of teachers, the hiring of administrators. They're dealing with the salaries. They're dealing with a lot. So I don't see why we wouldn't, have an option to elect them because I mean, for me, I mean, we homeschool our kids. Again, this is one of those things where like doesn't really affect me. But, if we were sending our kids to school, I'd be concerned. I mean, I want to know where you stand on these issues. Like, who are you? I mean, what are you about? Like, do you care about what the people think about you as far as your ideology and your stance on certain things? Are you just a complete wacko that is,
Right.
probably has some sick agenda for all we know that's trying to push things on our kids? And when there's no accountability, chaos rules. But similar proposals have been filed for a long time, but they just kind of get stalled out. But I think Jansen kind of hopes that this current focus on education freedom. I think he did this at the right time. Like this all
Mhm.
seems very, very coursed out, which is really good because then it's like, look, you want school choice? Like, boom, okay, like let's also make the school boards elected as opposed to appointed. Um, I made an example of that there's been too many um, I've heard rumors, I've heard stories where, these schools turn into breeding grounds for campaigns for elected officials that then turn around and, help or appoint some of these people in these schools that are pushing these campaigns when we already know that's not supposed to be happening. Then they appoint them, or they're appointing their cousin, or they're appointing
Mhm.
somebody that doesn't even have qualifications. I had a friend of mine who kind of made the point, well, a lot of people aren't qualified to, even be in these school board, positions. And I'm like, well, what is qualified? Like, what makes you qualified to be on a school board?
Mhm.
And I don't, because I don't, I guess I'd have to look it up. I'm sure there's not an ad listing on Indeed for school board officials, but I mean, what makes you qualified? Is it that you're an active parent, that are super involved in PTO or PTA, and is it that you've been a teacher for 10 or more years? I mean, like, what exactly makes you qualified? And don't get me wrong, I'm sure some of these people are really good people. And I mean, I know they are, and I know that some of them probably do have a lot of qualifications, but I can guarantee you that there's a lot of them you look at and they're just like, why are they even, why are they in on their school board? Um,
Mhm.
some of the key arguments that I was finding, um, so obviously it can lead to cronyism, reduce transparency from the school boards to the people, and kind of a disconnection also to voters and parents, especially in underperforming districts, because if the school districts aren't performing, they're not held accountable by anybody. So, I think elected school boards would kind of increase that accountability because they would face direct voter scrutiny and potential removal, on the next cycle if they're not doing their
Mhm.
job, as opposed to just chilling, collecting a nice salary, and sitting in these positions of really controlling what your kid is ingesting at school. So,
Yeah, and I
um,
sort of think that it'll one of the complaints I see about school choice all the time is supposedly going to weaken public school districts, and I think that the way that Representative Owen explained it to our conservative coalition meeting in Central Mississippi back in September is that it's the idea of the free market is that whenever you introduce this new level of competitiveness to our education in the state, it's going to make sure that these school districts that are underperforming want to achieve a better standard so the kids aren't just leaving their district. And I think this is another way to help achieve that, right? Is because the more input you have from parents, I think the better your education and your school district is going to be. And I think that's why you're right. This is obviously planned out that they're doing this together. And I think if they get it done, along with introducing some amendments to that school choice bill, a lot of great things can happen for the state.
I agree. I mean, even if even if this school choice and the whole rollout of what they're trying to do doesn't, come to fruition, that I think the way they hope to. I mean, this is still saying, hey, look, we're still trying to put some power back in the parents' hands. We're still trying to, um, hold these people accountable. We're still trying to give you the option to know what's going on in your school and to give you the choice um, to select not only the people, but the people that are going to select the curriculums. Like I said, who these people are. And let's just tie this back to, again, some of the biblical principles, and just kind of surrounding supporting elected versus appointed school boards. Scripture emphasizes accountable leadership, community involvement, and principles that all favor elected systems where leaders answer directly to those that they serve, and accountability to the people. Choose your tribes wise, understanding and experienced men, and I'll appoint them as your heads. Moses instructs the people to select their own leaders, reflecting participation in selection rather than just top down appointment.
Mhm.
So elected boards, empower communities, parents, taxpayers to choose who the stewards of this education is. Um, Transparency, it's required that they be found faithful to what they're doing, to their job, to the peoples of the communities. Appointed officials, they answer to these appointing bodies and over the public. So elections kind of ensure direct accountability, reducing the risk of mismanagement of, like I said, budgets and funds, self-interest, and just kind of over, like I said, overall the overseeing of children's education, and also just a wisdom and collective counsel where there is no guidance, the people falls, but in an abundance of counselors there is safety. That's from Proverbs 11. Elected school boards draw from broader community input, reflecting shared values, wisdom, just over centralized decisions where just a few people are making these decisions as opposed to the broad community being able to have an input in that. And then also, I think most importantly, parental responsibility in education. Like we talked about this last time. Um, I know you don't have kids yet, but I know you're going to be a great parent. But you're going to want to have a say so in what's going on in your kid's education. Train up a child in the way he should go. So that puts the duty in the parents to not just send their kid off to school and not worry about what's going on, but this gives them another option. If you found out that, God forbid, somebody on the school board is like a freaking child predator. I mean, like,
Yeah.
you're gonna, who's gonna do something like you're gonna, you might run for school board. Like, I mean, there's people around here that I know that would love to run to be on the school board, but they may not fit the status quo of just being in these groups of insulated, groups of people where it's all appointed. So for Mississippi families, I think it could
Mhm.
enhance local accountability, like I said. So I think we should just kind of pray for wisdom as lawmakers as they look at this, and kind of weigh out the accountability versus stability issues on it. And again, this is just principles over party, empowering parents to honor God's design for our communities, and not just for people that kind of want to maintain power and position. Because I mean, let's face it, that's really what it is. Whenever you're being appointed to a position, there's not a whole lot of accountability, especially when you're holding a big salary, or it's like if people were, if running for an election was that easy, I mean, people would have just put their resume out there and let people vote on that,
Right.
but it's not always the case. So, anyways, that kind of leads us into the next thing. School choice, still a hot topic, man. It's still it is still just raging right now. Have you heard anything new about that?
Not really anything new. I know a couple people in the speaker's office that, and that this is their main thing, and they've just really said, "Hey, it's up to the Senate now." And watching the Senate the last couple years, there's no telling what the Senate's going to do to it. I think there will be some amendments, and I think that there needs to be some. Will the Senate make the right ones? Or will the Senate do too much? I think that those are some good questions that we're just gonna have to wait and see. But I think the idea and the spirit of the bill is good. I think there's a couple things that definitely need to be changed, but yeah, other than that, I think this week it's sort of stalled out a little bit, and it's just up for the Senate to decide.
Yeah, so we were talking about it earlier this week, and I think the 16th of February is kind of the last kind of like the last moment that they have, or I think the third is whenever it gets kicked in.
Mhm.
But the 16th is kind of the last chance that they have, but it's going to go to the Senate. I think they're going to hold on to the bill as long as they can to try to lobby some senators into this. I'm sure they're looking at what some changes, that are going to be made to the bill. It's going to look different. It's going to look a whole lot different than it does right now. There's a lot in it. It's 553 pages.
Yeah.
Um, that's probably my least favorite thing about it because we know that there's they always say the devil's in the details and it's a big bill. But we were talking about this before we started. There's some good things about it and there's some not so favorable things about it. But the fact of the matter is it's dividing a lot of people. There's so many split choices on it, or split opinions, and what we're planning on doing as part of Merge and as part of CCMS is doing a town hall that is going to allow both sides to come sit down and share their side of the story. So why this might be good, why this might be bad. Um, what are some pros and what are some cons? Because like I said, I think there's good things and I think there's not so good things about it.
Hmm.
It's going to look totally different by the time it comes out of the Senate and if and when it does. But ultimately, I mean, the goal here is to put some power back in the people's, in the parents' hands.
Right.
Um, we know that it's being driven by Republican priorities. Obviously, Governor Tate Reeves, House leadership, they're all for it. Our two front runners for governor, Shad White, Andy Gibson, they're both for it. I mean, you know, does that say anything? I think so. We have some critics saying, well, there's a bunch of outsiders coming from Mississippi that are, if it's so good, why are they trying to convince you it's good? Like, I said this to somebody the other day. If it's so bad, why are they trying so hard to convince you that it's bad?
Hmm.
I get it. There's teachers that have been in this world, and there's a lot of misinformation out there from both sides that can make it seem kind of scary. Like schools are going to be underfunded, schools are going to be cut, to size, and schools are going to be overcrowded. Schools have the ability to like not do anything. Like they don't have to accept any transfers. If a
Hmm.
school's doing well, like they're going to get more funding, and if a school's not doing so well, it's gonna hopefully kind of give them a little kick in the rear to do better.
Yeah.
For whether it's the academics, whether it's the sports aren't doing well, maybe they don't need to have sports. I know one of the other things we're not going to talk about a whole lot, but like the whole NIL bill for high school students. I mean, somebody was like
Goodness
pitching a fit
gracious.
over that, and I'm like, let's face it. I mean, not many people or excuse me kids are going to go like pro in sports, and I mean I get it. They're like, well, it's going to take away there's some I think somebody said it. They're like, they don't even teach financial literacy, and I'm like, well, I'm glad that we're talking about teaching financial literacy in high school, and maybe maybe if anything that's what it's going to pull out of this is going to help some schools start teaching that kind of thing. But school choice, it passed by a razor thin majority, 61-59, about a week ago in the House, sponsored by Speaker of the House Jason White, and like we talked about earlier, Jansen Owen. It creates the Magnolia student accounts that, starting in 27-28, would provide up to $7,000 per student for 12,500 eligible students that are going to be allowed, mainly from low to moderate income families. Um, we'll just stop right there. A lot of people are saying, "Well, it's only allowing certain people." Like, well, it's rolling out in stages. From what I understand,
Hmm.
it's giving the people that may have the most need to move from a school the option first, as opposed to just want to. Because I was reading a stat the other day. Like one of the biggest things about why somebody may want to move their kid from a school is bullying, and not just necessarily because of the school, but it's also for bullying, it's for underperforming schools. So it's a combination of things, but some of the funds would also cover private school tuition. Homeschooling is going to get some help in there. This allows stuff for tutoring, uniforms, Tim Tebow was in the state. I believe it was today,
As
um,
yesterday.
yesterday, kind of talking about it and the Tim Tebow Act and allowing homeschool kids to be involved in extracurricular activities. So that's pretty neat. But it also expands charter schools if they want to try to open up. And I've heard some
Mhm.
arguments there, like these schools don't make it. Well, probably because they weren't, they didn't have the people didn't have the options and the help to get those schools there. I know somebody personally that was trying to, open a micro school because, their kids were just, kids are all different, and one size does not fit all for them. So they did that out of a care for their kids to try to help teach them. She was actually a teacher, had several students there, but it just became not feasible for the parents. So this would kind of help, the parents and those micro schools or charter schools operate a little bit differently. I do think there needs to be some accountability there, and they need to be able to track that funding to make sure that these places don't just open up and then shut down. I agree with some concern there. I think that's where the Senate, is probably going to pick apart the okay, like here it is. Now let's pick apart the things that could go wrong and then try to amend some of that.
Mhm.
But some of the Senate leaders have expressed some strong opposition towards it, especially towards the voucher program, or excuse me, component of it, stating that they won't support using public dollars for private schooling. Again, this is only, I think the average we were talking was like 13,000 per student is what, the average student, costs in Mississippi. 7,000, which is basically the per pupil. That's kind of the state's base student cost. That's not necessarily the federal funding that's going to be traveling with that student if they decide to go somewhere. But there's some other, elements to it. The federal tax credit scholarship programs. Um, Governor Reeves recently opted Mississippi into the federal program created by the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, signed by President Trump. So starting next year, it offers dollar for dollar federal tax credits up to 1,700 for donations and scholarships and grants and organizations. That kind of helps enable families to access these funds for private schools, homeschooling, religious curriculum, and honestly, I think that's, I'll stop right there. That's something that we talked about last time. Like people, and even me and my wife were talking about this. Like most put their kids in private schools because there's more freedom of religion in private
Mhm.
schools and in these homeschool settings. Like, you know, school prayer, optional school prayer was included in this HB2 bill because, it's again one of those things that they're trying to get back as not necessarily being mandatory, but we can't just completely remove that. And I mean, our curriculums for homeschool are Christian faith based. We make sure that everything that we're doing, whether it's math or history, is taught from a biblical, perspective and a worldview that kind of, allows them to, see things from a religious standpoint, and not just kind of the one size fits all standpoint that I
Right.
think a lot of us kind of grew up learning under. So this bypasses state level vouchers, the debate on that, and it expands the voice for via federal incentives as well. Um, some of the people that are for it are kind of praising that it's empowering the parents. Obviously, I agree
Mhm.
with that. I mean, I think you hear more. I'm not hearing a ton of parents that are against school choice. I may be wrong, but I mean, I'm finding administrators. Not that they're wrong, but I'm hearing a lot of the opposition more from teachers and administrators. Is that what you're seeing, or am I crazy?
Yeah, I'm saying I haven't seen hardly any parents come out against it. It's really just been teachers and admin, um, that have come out against it. So, I think that starts to raise some questions, right? Is, if that's the case and we have such a divide between our parents and our educators and our admin, why is that? And, is it funding? Is it, the approach, or is it power? And I think those are some questions that it starts to raise. And, regardless of what happens with the bill, I'm glad that this stuff is sort of getting in the forefront so that we as a state can confront that and ultimately make our education system better.
Yeah, I agree. It's and I see some parents that aren't really happy about it, but I mean, like I said, I feel like it's maybe 3 to 1.
Yeah.
That it's
I mean,
like,
polling's
parents
been
are.
done that it's wildly popular in the state.
Yeah, exactly. I think it was like 70 or 80%, that are for it.
Mhm.
So and these are like several polls, and I mean, again, it's just that I'm just not seeing it from the parents, and I think any parents that are seeing it, I mean, you have to think about that. Like, okay, like my kid's getting bullied at school, or whatever the case is. My kid's failing because, I mean, I had my own complaints as, when we had ours in school for a little bit whenever, we adopted, and um our oldest was in school for a little bit, and just the transparency and what was going on, and just wasn't, don't get me wrong, these are compassionate people, but they're just the way it was being done was just not very cool. And
Yeah.
for us it was like we were trying to stabilize, three adopted kids. So keeping them in a routine that they were used to was kind of like our way of figuring that out. But thankfully, we were able to get her home, and now we're homeschooling all of them. But that's that flexibility. That's that parents want to be able to do something about it when they see something that isn't going well for their kids. I mean, if not, parents, we need to wake up. We need to be paying attention to our kids and what they're saying. um, on top of that, I mean, there's just, I don't know, man. I just, I know that I struggled with it. I can't imagine my son sitting in a desk for 8 hours a day. I know that's tough. Like it is,
It's pretty bad.
yeah, I
It's
remember.
pretty
I mean,
bad.
I barely made it, but I made it. So nothing against it. Like I really nothing against it. I mean, don't get me wrong. When I'm saying that, I'm for the parents being empowered. But schools have changed. Schools have changed. The generations of kids have changed. There's a lot more. I mean, there's a lot more predators out there. There's a lot more people that are not for the well-being of your kids. They're just concerned
Mhm.
with whether it's we could go down a rabbit hole with this about kind
Yeah.
of how the whole public school system was set up to kind of make workers and just kind of teach people to be part of the system. And whole nother story for another day. Maybe that'll be the late night podcast we do. But anyways, how does this tie into a biblical perspective, supporting school choice, parental responsibility? Scripture emphasizes that super big, education in godly ways, stewardship, aligning with choice efforts, parental authority in education. We were talking about that. Um, the heart of a man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. Families as stewards should wisely use the resources that, you know, their tax money, like
Mhm.
you can sit here and complain like I'm paying, taxes, and I have, kids, and my money's going to public schools and processes and systems that, I don't get to use or we don't get to be a part of. But they should be able to use that for the best outcomes for their kids, avoiding that kind of one size fits all systems that, may fail, kids that are vulnerable, kids with disabilities, kids that, like I said, all kids are different. So, I've heard some arguments like, I don't want my tax dollars going to private schools. Like, somebody kind of confronted me the other day, like, it's not the government's job to pay for it. Like, your tax money and tax dollars are going to much crazier and weird things that you have no idea about. That if you really looked into, your mind would be blown, especially on the federal level. So I'm for, dismantling the whole federal Department of Education. I think, a lot of a lot of that is bloated, especially on the administrative side. And that's where teachers are losing. They're
Mhm.
that's a tough job. My wife teaches the kids. I'm like, look, that's your gift. That's what you're here for. I can't do that. That's not for me. I wish, she should be making 100 grand a year for what she does, but teachers should definitely be making more from what they're making. I think the median in Mississippi is like 50,000 or something like that, which is um I don't think enough. And then on the flip side, superintendents are making 150 plus, and they're not in the classrooms but preaching. I've never seen them in the class. I've never seen these politicians in the classrooms. Like, well, they were citizens too. They are citizens, and they all went to private schools. Like, not every single one. Like, just the arguments that are being made are just kind of funny. I mean, like I said, I listen to both sides, but I'm looking for accountability, and how the schools can be more competitive. There's more parental oversight. How that
Mhm.
can help drive schools to be better, and just kind of reflects the faithful use of the talents of the schools, and then also allowing the students to flourish. Because not every parent, I get it, can has the ability to homeschool, to possibly move school districts, but it's gonna,
Mhm.
like, the more it opens up, it's gonna, like, things are gonna open up and things are gonna become better. If your kid is struggling with being bullied, and we live a couple 100 feet from a school. And if my kid was being bullied and I knew that there is a mom right down the road who has a micro school, who is has, 5 kids that my kid plays with in the neighborhood, who get along with, and she's doing this homeschool curriculum, and my kid can go do school there for a couple hours a day. And then, like, there's just, the options are endless. I've heard
Yeah.
arguments of rural communities that kind of don't get a big benefit from it because funding gets cut. But I think that's actually where some of these rural schools will get to flourish. And there's been studies on this, because then they get more into teaching the trades. Like, they're actually
Mhm.
working with businesses in the areas. And these students are, like, allowed to go to these mechanic shops, or places where they learn things that they're actually going to be doing, as opposed to some of the stuff that they're learning in school. They get out of school and then they don't know anything about balancing a checkbook, or you know changing a tire. But it also opens up the avenues for virtual teaching and virtual tutors. So I mean, I think the creativity and just kind of the what could be sparked from that, is a lot better than you know not having a choice and saying, this is what you have to do, this is where you have to send your kid.
Mhm.
No questions asked, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We don't care if they're being bullied, and then this is what we're
Yeah.
teaching them in school, and it's about crazy people reading them books that are just not good.
Yeah.
We've heard nightmare stories about it. So empowering the parents to have some say so and all that is super important. I think you could kind of agree on that. Like I said, I know you don't have kids yet, but man, I know you're gonna be a good dad one day, and
Thank you.
we want that to be an option for the next generation to kind of pay attention to what's happening now. That this stuff matters because school's not for everybody. Public school sitting in a classroom is not for everybody. It's just not. So that kind of leads us into the same area of conversation for the next kind of segment. I'm calling it superintendents behaving badly. This was a art from an article that the Magnolia Tribune put out this month. It was reported of two former Mississippi school superintendents, Earl Joe Nelson and Mario Willis, along with a Missouri based school teacher and consultant, Monica Smith Taylor. They pleaded guilty in federal court to conspiracy to commit embezzlement. So, this is basically a scheme that was running since right after COVID 2021 to 2023, with payments tied back to like 2019 involving reciprocal fraud, where basically the superintendents abuse their authority to direct public funds um, to fake consultants for contracts for services that were never performed.
Hmm.
Again, ties back to the school boards being elected superintendents. It should be elected because otherwise they're just abusing their power. And not all of them, but there's here's an example. Hollandale School District under Willis paid 94,000 to companies benefiting Nelson. Um, Clarksdale schools under Nelson paid 25,000, and Lee County also under Nelson paid another 23,000 to companies benefiting Willis. Separately, Hollandale paid 250 grand to Smith Taylor's company for overpriced, undelivered consulting. She then met with the superintendent, where she actually got some kickback cash. So this kind of it defrauded all three of these Mississippi school districts of taxpayer money, hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayer money that was meant for education. Um, Plain and simple. I think this was also a very coursed out, um, very well done, investigation on exposing this kind of thing because it happens. And then a lot of the time it happens. And I think 5 years in federal prison is the maximum, which, I don't get me wrong. I mean, one day in federal prison would be terrible, but it's just, they're probably not gonna get that, a lot of
Yeah.
the times, unless this was really exposed, they'll get a slap on the wrist and, say, "Hey, don't do that again," and probably send them to another school to work.
Hmm.
Um, so, it's really sad to see, but this is another reason why some accountability and some light has to be shed on what's going on in these school districts and these administrators and these school boards. Um, State Auditor Shad White actually commended the collaboration and the ongoing efforts to help protect these taxpayers and our taxpayers and their money, our money. So we'll tie this back to some biblical principles on what this means here. um, this is pretty
Yeah.
simple: honesty and leadership, integrity. That some of these folks, obviously, in handling school resources. I mean, what do you think? I mean, this is obviously
Yeah, and
pretty
this is
stupid.
what Shad has been talking about for a while now is that we have Mississippi, especially in the South, is unique in how much money we spend on admin and superintendents and stuff like that in education. It makes up an extremely significant portion of our budget. I want to say it's bloated. They've estimated around $300 million or so, and that's absurd, especially in a state like Mississippi that doesn't rake in as much taxpayer money that would fund something quite like $300 million in excess. And it's very obvious that there's a lot of corruption going on, and it's such a shame that our state has sort of become a playground for these establishment types to go in and make money off of this and that, especially something, as innocent as our kids and their education. And I think the more and more that we see stuff like this, the more and more that's going to come out. And I think it's going to make, people that are maybe a little bit hesitant for, radical change in education to get on board with it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's money that they were entrusted with. Um, to do something good with. They hold these positions of trust over this taxpayer money. And you're right, Shad has been doing a great job at exposing a lot of this and kind of what I mean, man, it's just greed and theft. And they think that, well, we're actually spending it in a place for consulting, but it just so happens to be our friend, and it's just like a circle of like, I'll pay
Yeah.
you to pay me to pay him, and he'll pay me to pay you to pay him, and it's just
Hmm.
like it's benefiting nobody but themselves. A straight abuse of authority, and it happens so much more often than we know of. But like you said, it's going to come out more. Um, Shad's office has done a great job at looking for this stuff and uncovering it. But this case kind of underscores, I think, a need for godly character in
Hmm.
these public roles and transparency and accountability to prevent just a whole betrayal of public trust. Because again, if this wasn't exposed by the Magnolia Tribune, who else is gonna to report on it, or was it gonna even be heard about? So
Right.
kudos to those folks over there for breaking this for us. We just want to help spread the news and just let people know. Like, it'd be interesting to see. I was looking into some audits to some school districts in the area, and there are some conflicts of interest. There are some money that wasn't handled appropriately. I mean, there were little things, I guess you could say. And the school district said, "Oh yeah, well, we told them not to do that again." And "Oh yeah, we told them that needs to be handled sooner." And "Oh yeah, we told them to," and it's like, okay, like, it wasn't very hard to find this stuff, but
Hmm.
they're certainly not talking about it. But I mean, if it was a company, if it was a business, like, that's how these things have to be operated, because
Yeah.
otherwise they're just using it for themselves to pay their friends. And I think if you're in that business to get rich or to get kickbacks, you're in it for the wrong reason.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's sad and unfortunate some of these people get lucky and get in these positions. um and usually most of the time they're very unsuccessful business people, and they just so happen to wiggle their way into a place where they can handle public funds and then obviously mishandle them. So hopefully they get what's coming to them. Speaking of Shad, we will discuss this a little bit. So obviously we know about kind of the whole high profile case involving the misspent taxpayer funds, the whole TANF welfare scandal, where at least $100 million in federal aid that was intended for the poor and people that really needed it was allegedly misused. Allegedly, I mean, it was misused between 2016 and 2020. That included payments tied to Brett Favre,
Hmm.
and um, the former wrestler. I didn't really know who he was, honestly, but Ted DiBiase apparently is coming in to be a motivational speaker. Dude is getting paid like 30, 40 grand a week to come in and give motivational speeches to people making, I don't know, like $16 an hour or something like that. Um, it's kind of a slap in the face that these people, what they were doing. But anyways,
Hmm.
um, Supreme Court heard these arguments. It's kind of a dispute right now between these Republican officials, Lynn Fitch and Chad. It kind of centers around who holds the authority to initiate the prosecution and the civil lawsuits to help recover those funds. So, Shad is obviously saying like this um, falls under my department, under my authority to institute the suit. And then it's the attorney general's job to kind of prosecute the suit when trying to help recover this state money. Shad argues that, it's plain and simple. Like, this is, it's my job, like, to file the suit, attorney general's job to handle the prosecution. Um, and this is mainly going to come from Favre, over the welfare linked speaking fees, like I was saying, that were related to even a volleyball arena, I think at USM, that
Yeah.
was built, with this money. So Fitch is contending that as the chief legal officer of the state, she has the authority to file the suit and manage the suits on behalf of the state to avoid conflicts, frivolous claims, or duplication. She sued Favre and others in 2022 on behalf of the Department of Human Services, but excluded some of the specific claims and interests. So basically, I think she didn't sue him for as much money, and Shad was trying to sue him for more money. Um, Kind of makes you look at that like, huh, I know in the Supreme Court, Judge Griffiths, who's actually one of my professors at Belhaven, was like, so are you guys going to go after this extra money? And they didn't really respond to that. So,
Hmm.
it's interesting to note though that while Shad was trying to sue Favre independently, F- Lynn Fitch kind of sued to block it in February of 24. Again, accusing just because of the whole book that had come out and it kind of talked about her office in maybe a negative light. Um, but in 2024, Hinds County Chancellor Dwayne Thomas ruled in favor of Shad, interpreting that he did have the initial rights to file the suit. But Lynn Fitch's office appealed that, so we'll kind of see where that goes. I know the judges, that from what I was reading, they kind of expressed some frustration over the interagency, fighting, if you will. It's kind of like brothers and
Hmm.
sisters fighting here. Like, hey, y'all are supposed to be going after the same thing. So what are we fighting about? Like, why? We're supposed to be serving the taxpayers. Why aren't we doing that? Um, so if the attorney general views a case like this, she's supposed to prosecute it anyways. There shouldn't be really a debate with it, but now it's like, well, she's not going to pursue it because of conflicts of interest, because then it would be like she was doing it for Shad or against Shad, or if she didn't do it as much as he was doing it because of the book he wrote, and that's why she wasn't participating in it as well, or that her office wasn't. So kind of a mess, kind of silly. You know, they I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think Shad White is absolutely, in the right here. I mean, because if you're going to go after fraud, especially at such a level like this, especially with what it was about, welfare. I mean, it's supposed to go to the poorest who need it the most, and it said it was, used to build a volleyball facility. Why wouldn't we want to go to the fullest extent that we can? And it is Shad. It's the state auditor's office job to go after and find out how much there is. Lynn Finch is the one who needs to do her job and prosecute it, and that is something that she has failed to do routinely. And if we're going to collect the money, I don't think that should be the job of the attorney general's office. It's the auditor's office who is in charge of all this stuff. I think they should be able to collect the money, because especially given all the context around it, when we know that the attorney general's office hasn't done hardly anything. They've only picked up the ball on this because Shad White brought it to the forefront. So I think that's what's going on here, and it's sort of a mudslinging contest as if it was a governor's race that's just not been announced yet. I think that's what we're seeing, but I think Shad White is absolutely in the right.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what you know the Tribune also reported on this as well, and it is kind of like shots fired a little bit because, there was talks of Lynn possibly making the governor's run as well. But it kind of makes you wonder, like, is she kind of throwing some mud at Shad right here and just
Mhm.
causing more ruckus and just causing an issue to kind of shoot his name down a little bit, or maybe just cause more of a pain in his side? But um, yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Like I said, it's misuse of government funds again, corruption again. Um, they've done a great job of exposing this. I think the attorney general's office needs to prosecute it. Um, and like you said, it's money that was supposed to be used to help the needy and help people um, that were being exploited basically, because they were poor and just couldn't defend themselves. So, this fighting among these leaders just kind of reminds us of, I mean, it reminds me of how much there is a need for unity and humility, especially whenever, we're supposed to be on the right side,
Mhm.
of doing the right things. So, Psalm 133, how good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity, as opposed to fighting with each other, against selfish ambition, whatever that is. If there is a ulterior motive here, if there is a main objective for them to maybe smear the other one or one way or the other, I mean, I see it as, the money was found to be misused. It should be prosecuted. We should try to get the money back. And there really shouldn't be an argument about it. And I think
Yeah.
because there is an argument about it, it makes you wonder, like, why? I mean, who are we
Yeah.
trying to protect? It doesn't look good. It makes it look like, there's just fighting within the house and we don't have our stuff together. When we have potentially a really good candidate for governor here. We would think we would be circling the wagons to kind of help protect that, but apparently they found it as a good opportunity to kind of just bicker with each other and not get something done, sooner, when I think sooner rather than later. But this is something that'll probably be dragged out, like I said, to throughout the year to see, how long can we drag this out, and just try
Mhm.
to make it a thing. Um, Speaking of Shad, we'll jump into one of the last few things that we'll talk about. Obviously, the fraud in Minnesota, that we've seen kind of over the last couple months, that has been exposed. Massive theft, again, corruption, from the federal and state social services programs, that were primarily targeting child nutrition, Medicaid, child care subsidies. So basically, it was like centered around this Feeding Our Future scheme that led to charges against 92 people, with 62 convicted as of this month for over $250 million, in COVID era child food aid. So this is again money that should have been used for the needy, funds meant for hungry kids, but allegedly it was used for luxury vehicles, homes, wire transfers, probably terrorism abroad and at home. Um, there's probes that say this could be closer to like a $9 billion scheme stemming back to like 2018 across like 14 programs, including Medicaid. Potentially half of like 18 billion.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is a ton of, like, this ain't these ain't small numbers. I mean, this ain't, no offense, this ain't Brett Favre money. Well, maybe
Mhm.
offense. This is bigger money than that, and this is stuff that was going on right here at home. They were doing these fake enrollments. There was fake kids, ghost sites tied to overseas groups like Al Shabaab. Um, we've heard of the YouTuber Nick Shirley, who kind of was, on the ground doing a lot of this uncovering. Um, it was amplified by Elon, JD Vance. This prompted the Trump administration to pause the federal child care funding towards those groups. We had the FBI, DHS that kind of got involved in it. Um, there's people that are arguing this is an attack against Somali citizens or people. Um, and then obviously Governor Tim Walz, who is just kind of in the middle of it. He knew what was going on, and obviously because he dropped out of his reelection bid for 2026 because
Mhm.
he knew what was going on. And I'm sure there is a kickback coming back to him as well. So there are some key figures that were convicted of it as well. Um, and again, this is tied back to Shad's work as well. So, like we were saying, he had exposed some of this a while back, um, including the 94 million in the welfare scandal that was going on here. Like I said, with Brett Favre and old Diabasi. Um, but that is also linked to the Minnesota fraud and the national issue because this is all just kind of a web that ties up. They saw that, hey, this is a way where they're just giving money towards these things and we can just use it for whatever we want. And they were seeing it as easy for them to defraud due because there was a lax of oversight. Um, and Shad talked about that several years back. He criticized the inaction back then, and it took up to this year before crackdowns really began. And like I said, his audits have recovered millions and spurred some reform. So I think this is great work. I mean, I just think that it just sucks that it's taken this long, but it's amazing how much can be stolen and exploited, this fast. I mean, don't you think?
Yeah, 100% agree. And, this is something that has been going on in Minnesota for around half a decade at this point, and it wasn't until, Nick Shirley's, journalism that we were able to get it to the forefront of the news and on Twitter and X and stuff. And yeah, it's honestly it's appalling, right? Because we were talking about this is, in Mississippi it was with the welfare, and then here in Minnesota it's largely with the, childcare programs and stuff. And why is it always the children and the most innocent among us that are victims to all of this fraud? And not only just fraud, but whether it be abortion or what they're teaching in schools or what they're feeding people these days. I mean, it is our children that have been feeling the brunt of all of these horrific and honestly demonic policies that have been pushed in this country, for the last, you can say 20 years or so, and thankfully we're starting to see some changes on that. But it's insane to me that there's just this much leveling. There's been reports of hundreds of $1 million of cash being flown out of the Minnesota airport, going to Somalia, like you were saying, to fund global terrorism. I mean, it's honestly it's insane. I mean, you haven't seen one mother come out and complain about their child losing daycare because no mother lost their child's daycare whenever any of this was found out and all these places shut down. I think that conviction number is going to go up. And, we've seen since this happened, after all the fraud was uncovered, that's whenever the Trump administration sent in, the thousands of ICE officers into Minneapolis to help clear up that situation. And then as a result of that, we had the justified shooting of Renee Good. And then, like what happened this past weekend where they stormed the church. I mean, all of this stuff has happened because that fraud was uncovered and you had the response to it. And, I think it's just sort of the enemy is not hiding behind, the fog anymore. They're out in front of us. We can see their motives and we can see how far they're going to go. And now it's just about how we respond to it.
Yeah, I mean, say what you want, about the current administration. I think, kudos to Trump and deploying that those departments into there to clean this up because I mean this is like you said over a decade now. This has been going on for a long time and that is a ton of money. Who knows? I'm sure it went to other places, and like you said, it's affecting the kids the most. It's affecting the next generation. Um, Providing or I should say not providing just the
Mhm.
assistance that was needed to help, families that it was supposed to, and I'm not saying it's government's job to necessarily take care of all the problems, I don't think that's the case, but there is a time and a place for what these funds were intended to be used for, and whether you like it or not, I don't think you would like it that it was, instead of helping people, which we are called to be stewards of good resources and be and have justice for the vulnerable and defend the weak and uphold the cause of the poor. This fraud diverts help from these children and these families. um it's sad, it really is
Mhm.
sad, that it's this corruption, the bad stewardship of resources. um but like you said, they're not behind the fog anymore. Stuff's coming out. um Galatians 6, God is not mocked, what everyone sows, so he shall reap. So White's push for prosecution promotes righteous governance, as righteousness exalts a nation. So thank God that this stuff is just, because it blows my mind. I mean, it really does. Like, I'm wondering why we're so much in debt as a country.
Mhm.
Why things, not everything's perfect. I get it, but I mean, like, it's because there's so much corrupt crap. And if this is
Yeah.
just another point of, if government wasn't so big, there wouldn't be all these different ways for them to be, you know, basically just exploiting these programs that are actually meant for good causes. Because I mean, I
Yeah.
think we all want that. I think we're all pretty human, decent human beings to say that, yeah, like, some of my money goes to helping, the needy
Mhm.
and the fatherless, and people that really need assistance.
Yeah.
I think there's people that take advantage of that at the same time, don't get
Yeah,
me wrong.
and that's part of what President Trump has talked about is he's talked about in a way, just as we can use tariffs and other stuff to help bring our hopefully bring our national debt and our deficit down, is that if we uncover all of this fraud, I mean that's probably where a lot of that 2 trillion, that's the difference between what we spend and what we take in. A lot of that is probably, fraud. And that's what he was trying to do with Doge, but obviously Congress didn't codify it, so they could only work for 100 days or whatever. But that's what they're trying to do, and God bless them for trying, and I think they're doing everything they can. And I'm glad that we finally have an administration and an executive branch that is willing to call that out, and understand that's a huge part of the problem. And I think that Mississippi can be, in the forefront of that, with Shad White, because Shad White has made that, a huge proponent of his agenda and his message that he sends out to people. And he's talked about that. He's like that fraud. If we just eliminate a lot of this fraud, we can help rein in our national debt and get closer to having a surplus.
Yeah, and kind of just piggybacking off what you were saying with Trump and some of these tariffs. I mean, this stuff is, you know, he's making use of the way that these tariffs and some of this funding, and the way that, other countries are actually participating and kind of doing their part, and we're not necessarily
Hmm.
taking care of everybody. It's being used in a very smart business like way. Like, instead of taxing our people more, and instead of, it coming directly out of our pockets to fund these things that's already being corrupted anyways, find the corruption. We make everybody else do their part as well, because let's face it, America's been carrying the load for such a long time.
Hmm.
And then we just use those funds to help do the good work that needs to be done as well. And that allows American citizens to keep more money in their pocket, and to keep gas prices, grocery prices, homes more affordable,
Hmm.
credit card companies from exploiting people into getting into more debt. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just like, man, it's hard to complain, honestly, but people are going to complain.
Yeah.
Whatever, I mean, whatever side you sit on, people are going to complain. But
Yeah.
when you look at it from this scope, it's like, man, not that bad of stuff,
Yeah.
certainly good stuff as far as, it's not perfect. I mean, it's not perfect, I'm sure there's still stuff that's gonna go on. Everything's not gonna get caught. But when you're saying, 19 billion and who knows how much, and then another
Mhm.
14 million in Mississippi, I mean, good
I
grief.
mean,
I
all that
mean,
it adds up.
yeah, I mean, that could, there shouldn't be a problem. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's people that really need it. There's people that cannot help themselves. That exists. There are kids. I mean, in foster care, there are, but there's a lot of good people doing good works to help these people. And if they, instead of having to find funds for the right ones that are trying to do this work, it's going to these crazy, crazy programs that have no oversight, and then it's just getting exploited. And you know, people are going
Mhm.
on vacations and buying fancy cars and funding terrorism. So I mean, it's just it's outrageous. But this will get us into the last thing you said it a minute ago. The groups that anti-ICE protesters storming the church this past week in Minnesota. They stormed a church service. Don Lemon, a former news guy, January 18th. These protesters from the Racial Justice Network stormed city's church in St. Paul, Minnesota, disrupting the Sunday worship service. The activists accused Pastor David Eastwood of secretly serving as the acting ICE field director in Minnesota, chanting slogans like "Ice Out" and "Justice for Renee Good," um, referencing recent ICE-related shootings. The intrusion obviously, scared people. There was kids there, there was families there. This is a place of prayer. I mean, this is a place of worship. This is where people are obviously going to find connection with, community and Jesus. But like I said, former CNN anchor Don Lemon was embedded with the group and then had the nerve to live stream the event and
Yeah.
kind of go back and say this is protected speech. We can do this. We're journalists. Um, but dude's an idiot.
Well,
Attorney
yeah, today
General.
today they found out. I mean, you had, 3 people arrested today. One was a,
Yeah,
local BLM leader, one was a, member of actually the school board in Minneapolis, and then the other was this white guy that has gone viral for all of his sporadic and, I mean, honestly, like, schizophrenic rants about Donald Trump, ICE, and all this other stuff. Was extremely brutal, verbally to a lot of the, church attendees in Minnesota whenever they barged in. And it's, sort of ironic. Don Lemon recorded the whole thing thinking it would go well, and a lot of that footage is what's getting people arrested and charged with the FACE Act and the KKK Act. And it's honestly, and John Lemon would have been arrested today on top of everybody else if a judge hadn't denied to sign the warrant. And so the DOJ is exploring other avenues to get him arrested. So they're in the finding out stage. So
yeah. The FACE Act, for those who don't know, freedom of access to clinic entrances, which includes places of worship. So this is criminal conspiracy that this genius was videoing. Um, and like you said, two of the ringleaders or three have been arrested. The federal judge did reject the arrest for Don Lemon, the warrant, but like you said, they're looking at ways to kind of work around that, which I hope they do because I mean he basically recorded a crime. Um, this just echoes broader tensions over kind of the immigrations under the Trump administration and what all is going on there. Um, and it's just wrong. I mean, you don't, I just can't imagine. I know most churches, in Mississippi, especially, we have the Church Protection Act sponsored by Andy Gibson. So one of our other front runners
mhm.
for governor underscores the need for laws that help protect places of worship. This was signed in 2016. That kind of just allows churches to basically designate and train security teams in
Yeah.
case stuff like this happens, kind of extending the castle doctrine to protections of churches and enabling concealed carry for people. Gibson's a pastor himself, so it's empowering these small congregations to protect themselves against threats like shootings or disruptions. I was just thinking, like, I can't imagine like this happening in a church,
No, they
Mississippi,
would have been
because
lucky to get out of there alive if they had done
they would
that
have
in
been lucky to
Memphis.
get in the front door, probably,
Yeah.
honestly, because like you just don't play with that, and I feel
Mm.
terrible
Especially
for.
when it's such a misreading and, misquoting scripture. I mean, they're trying to the whole thing that they justify this on is, treat the foreigner as your own, and my response to that is they're being treated exactly as I would if I broke a law. If I broke into
Mhm.
another country or if I trespassed somewhere, I'm going to jail. They're getting
Oh yeah,
deported. I mean, that's
yeah,
the law. I mean, the book
probably
of Romans
worse.
is very clear on this, is that, nations are a thing and you have to respect the laws of the land. I mean, that's not to say that if there's a law that infringes upon the Bible that you're supposed to follow it. No, it's just but if we're gonna look at the scripture, if it says treat immigrants like your own, they're being treated exactly as I would if I trespassed somewhere.
Yeah, I feel terrible for those people at City's Church. Apparently they had armed security, or had they had armed security, they might have, deterred this group a little bit differently, but
Mhm.
um, I don't they didn't feel bad about what they were doing there. And like you said, I mean, Romans does talk about, pursue peace with everyone, but intimidating believers and especially children, just, and families, kind of contradicts that, what that does to people. And making these false accusations, like you said, of division, is not, they were not making good points about what they were trying to do. I mean, there is a different way of doing that. That just takes some audacity to go into a church, and basically start harassing people. Like I said, and I couldn't imagine something like that happening here. It just, they probably wouldn't have made it through the front door. Um, so hopefully they get everybody that was involved in that, because there's just no room for that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Um, and good job to the law enforcement and the agencies that are working to get this stuff cleared up, because it is ridiculous. And hopefully, what we've discussed, everything from the bills and the some of the local news to the national news, we've been able to, like I said, tie that back scripturally. I mean, these are all things that are happening around us, and we want to, while we can't explain everything, we can at least try to find some correlation to whether it's right or
Mhm.
wrong. I mean, that's kind of the
Right.
whole point here. And I feel like we've done that. This is just our opinion. But at the very least, we're looking at the context of the good book to help put these things into perspective and to help guide us into the decisions that obviously the idiots are making. And then obviously that, our administration is making, and the, from the state level, from the auditing to the laws that are being put in place here, and whether they're scripturally sound to the national level, and exposing the corruption and cleaning up some of this crap, so we can leave it better for the next generation, and to encourage and educate them on, hey, look, this is what you need to be looking for. This is not the only, um the fight's not over. It's going to keep going, so we just got to be well prepared for it. You got anything else, man? I think that's pretty much
I
it.
think that's good. I think this was a great episode. Look forward to doing this next week as well. And I also say I think I'm gonna try to maybe start doing, the more free time I get as the closer I get to graduation, possibly doing like, I know we talked about this whenever we started this thing is like having multiple shows, one single, double, whatever. I might start to do whatever I need to do, get my own show going. So I think just y'all keep paying attention, keep sharing this out, keep building us up, and I promise we're going to deliver for y'all. And we just thank y'all for being here.
Absolutely, man. The more we have to discuss and the more people we have discussing it, the better. So um thanks for hopping on. Like I said, we'll be back next week. We have a lot more stuff to cover. But we'll just
I
take it in
mean,
bites.
yeah,
We'll
shoot,
just
if we
take
if
it
we
in
have another
bites.
weekend like we did last weekend, we're gonna have a ton to talk about. So,
Yeah, we'll take it in bites and we'll try to cover the important stuff that's local to us here at home and some of the national stuff too. Like I said, we could be talking for hours, but we are at that mark. So thanks for everybody that tuned in. Everybody, it's going to be up on the channel for people to go back and listen to. Hopefully they will, because I think we covered everything that's being talked about right now in Mississippi.
mhm.
Some of the bigger things, and then some of the bigger national news that we're hearing about. There's obviously a ton of stuff, but I encourage people to leave comments, ask questions, reach out with things that they might want to hear about. We can touch on and hopefully try to connect some dots in it. So thank you, Blake.
Yes, sir.
Thanks to everybody that tuned in or watches. We will see y'all next week.
God bless y'all.